11, Pura investigation into distribution system planning of the electric distribution companies, new rate designs and rates review. My name is Kate Keenan. I am a Pura staff attorney and I'm serving as the hearing officer for this evidentiary hearing. The purpose of today's evidentiary hearing is to discuss the enrollment of current 10% low-income discount rate or LIDAR customers in the 5-tier LIDAR when the electric distribution companies implement the 5-tiered LIDAR. On the agenda today, we have presentations from UI and Eversource. Before we receive the presentations, I would like to take appearances, please, and then we'll pause for administrative matters and public comment.
Sure. Thank you. Alex Soder on behalf of the United Illuminating Company.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kathleen O'Hare for the Connecticut Light and Power Company doing business as Eversource Energy.
Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Susanna Nigro on behalf of DEEP.
Thank you.
Tom Lopez on behalf of EOE. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bonnie Roswig on behalf of the Center for Children's Advocacy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I don't think there's any other appearances. Are there any administrative matters? Anyone that would like to provide public comment? I don't see anybody. Looks like it. Okay. If not, Attorney Soder, would you like to introduce your witnesses and have them adopt their pre-filed materials? I believe they've been sworn in.
Thank you. Lisa and Kathy, if you'd please just introduce yourselves individually, your name and title.
Lisa Rosso, excuse me, Lisa Rosso, Revenue Recovery Manager for Avangrid.
Kathleen Wasselneck, Supervisor Credit and Collections.
And then Lisa and Kathy, I'll ask you a common set of questions. I'll just ask you to, as you just did, answer individually. As a part of your preparation for today's hearing, did you assist in the preparation of a presentation, which was filed in this docket as correspondence on January 3rd?
Yes.
Yes.
And do either of you have any necessary changes or revisions to that presentation?
No.
And do you adopt that presentation as your sworn testimony today?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, nothing further from me. I don't have any direct examination, so I will yield the floor to the witnesses and at the discretion of the hearing officer.
We'll start with are they going to provide the presentation or walk us through it? Or?
Walk you through.
Sure. Yeah. So I had my intention was to yield the floor to the witnesses to walk through the presentation, and then subject to cross-examination from the other parties.
Thank you.
So on our first screen here, we were asked to provide numbers of customers that enrolled in Tier 1 throughout the year, as well as number of customers enrolled monthly throughout the year. So you can see the graph for each one of those items. The next screen is we are asked to provide costs around if a customer was a Tier 1 with the 10%, what it would look like if they were 5% and or were 15%, and to see what kind of cost that would be if, depending on which way we went with the 10%. And this provides, of course, there would be a credit if it was dropped down to 5% and or, a debit if it was to be up, if the customer was to be upgraded to a 15% discount. Go to the next slide. We were asked whether the EDCs were able to maintain an LIDR customer's 12-month enrollment period if it changed the LIDR customer's discount level one or more times during that 12-month period. With the May 21st transition to Tier 2 in July 2024, yet maintain the 12-month enrollment period from May 2024 to May 2025. And the answer to that is yes, the customer would maintain their existing enrollment period, no matter what happens during that time period. The only exceptions that we do have would be, of course, during renewal time. So if it was renewed within the 60 days, the LIDR expiration date, the customer would now be enrolled for a new 12-month period. And then if the renewal through the DSS file within the 90 days of expiration date, the customer would be reinstated with the new 12-month renewal time. Any questions around that one? Good afterwards, okay. And then next was update on DSS timeline to implement the full 5-tier LIDR data matching. DSS has informed us that they have preliminary estimate of mid-May for implementing the full 5-tier LIDR data matching. However, DSS is still waiting to identify funding to allow the system vendor to execute these necessary changes. And our last screen was just proposed some solutions around with the customers that are on the Tier 1 and the fact that we can only have one Tier 1 and it'll be a different Tier 1. We're providing here some recommendations to move the customer to a new tier level when they are eligible during each customer's LIDR renewal period. Due to the elimination of the 10% discount and to avoid downgrading any customers until the end of their current LIDR enrollment period, the company is suggesting to take the following actions to transition customers to a new 5-tier structure. The company would build the 3, 4, and 5 tiers with a corresponding percent discount, 20, 40, and 50 respectively. At the time of implementation, upgrade all the customers to the current Tier 2, 50% discount, to the new Tier 5, 50% discount for the remainder of their validity period. So that way there's no impact to the customer. After all existing Tier 2 customers have been moved to Tier 5, modify the percentage discount value for the current Tier 2 from 50 to 15%. Upgrade all of the customers on the current Tier 1 10% to the new Tier 2 15%, and give them 15% discount for the remainder of their current LIDR validity period. And then after all existing Tier 1 customers have been moved to the new Tier 2, modify the percentage discount value for the current Tier 1 from 10% to 5%. And then also enrolling customers on the new LIDR tiers upon renewal for their current LIDR. That was it.
Authority staff. Thank you so much, Authority staff, Jenna Vigrass. So thank you for this presentation. I just wanted to confirm that we have a kind of shared understanding of what the questions are that we're trying to address today. So my understanding is that the first is that what do we do with customers that are currently on the 10% discount, that when the tier discount levels change, what do we do with those customers? Do we put them on 5% or 15%, et cetera? So that was the first question. The second is that, and I think maybe Eversource had brought this up, but my understanding is that the second question is when DSS identifies tier 1 or tier 2 customers before they can implement the 5-tier data matching process, where do we put those customers on the 5-tier discount? Could you confirm if my understanding is correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Were there any other questions or concerns that the company is proposing to address?
Not at this time.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. So I apologize, Laura. Is it possible to bring up the presentation again? So just moving back to your presentation on slide 2. Great, perfect. So as you said, this slide shows by month the number of customers enrolled on the 10% tier 1, and then on the right, the number of new enrollments on the 10% tier. And so I was hoping if you could address some potential discrepancies between those two charts. So specifically looking at December 2023 and January of 2024. So on the left, it looks like there are basically a total of 16,000 or 14,000 customers enrolled on tier 1. But on the right, it shows that about 20,600 customers were newly enrolled onto tier 1 of the low income discount rate in December. So I'm hoping you can provide a little more detail as to where those customers went and why there's a discrepancy between the two tables.
Sure. So the table on the right is the number of new enrollments each month in tier 1.
Right.
So December, that was our initial enrollment period. So that's why we had 20,000.
Mm-hmm.
In January, we had 392 new customers enrolled in tier 1.
Right.
And so on through those months. The chart on the left is how many customers were still enrolled in tier 1 as of the end of each of those months.
Okay.
So if you looked at December, we went from 20,000 initially enrolled to ending the month with 16,8. The difference, the 4,000, upgraded to tier 2.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. And so the customers that were originally enrolled in December of 2023, were they re-enrolled this past December, in December of 2024?
They would have started to receive renewal letters 60 days prior to their expiration date. So some of them could have enrolled in October, late October maybe, or November, or maybe not until December. It all depends on how they reacted to the renewal letters that we sent.
Right.
Because they did get a 60-day, a 30-day, and a 15-day notice if they hadn't done anything.
Thank you. And so are those re-enrollment numbers captured in the right chart of the number of new enrollments on the 10% tier discount?
The December 456.
Or November or October, whenever those customers were re-enrolling?
If they were a new enrollment, yes, they would probably, if it came in as a new effective date, then yes, they would probably be in those numbers.
Okay, thank you. And do you have an explanation for why the number of total enrolled customers tends to stay potentially around the same amount? So between, I would say, like 22,000 and 30,000, but there are customers, like new customers enrolling every month. Can you provide just potential reasons why? Are there customers that are dropping off of the low income discount rate? Are they moving to tier 2, et cetera? If you could just provide some detail on that.
All those reasons. We have customers constantly moving, so you're moving out, not necessarily moving into a new location. You have customers changing tiers. So it's a very moving number with the customers. And of course, now with the renewal, it's even more up and down right now. You know, we've seen a huge decrease, which we expect to, of course, go up, but they're the customer is not renewing has been rather high, but
Mhm.
from our research, it looks like that's a lot of more so the DSS customers. So, but it's only January, so time will tell. But
Right.
it's all those things.
Thank you. So if a customer moves to a different address, do they have to re-enroll in the discount rate, or is that they're moving to a different service territory?
Right, moving to a different service territory. When they're moved out and we do a move in, if it's in our service territory, they're automatically just,
It's transferred.
transferred.
Okay, thank you. And so I wanted to know a little bit more about your tracking system of customers. So are you able to identify, essentially, here are all of the customers, like specifically, these are the customers that enrolled in December 2023, January 2024, et cetera? Or is your system essentially just telling you this number of customers enrolled this month versus this month?
No, we can see the actual customer number. So I could see that Jenna enrolled in December and Julia enrolled in January and, Lisa enrolled in February. We can see the actual specific customers for each month
Okay, thank you.
and each tier.
So for essentially the next 12 months, does your system allow you to see, here are the customers whose 12-month enrollment period is expiring every month? And do you have kind of like the number of customers whose initial 12-month enrollment period is expiring in January 2025, February 2025, et cetera?
We can see that, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So could we move to the third slide or the next slide? Yeah, so just to get a little bit more information on the estimated costs slide. So does this slide show the anticipated cost to ratepayers if the company were to transition all current 10% LiDAR customers onto 15% or 5% essentially over the next year? I'm just trying to understand kind of what costs are being presented here.
This is based on our numbers for 2024, the number of customers we had on each month on tier one, what their discount, 10% discount was. And if we were to take those same customers, what the discount would be at 5% and at 15%. And then, of course, showing either the cost savings or the additional cost for this same customers. It's just, of course, it's an estimate, so we don't really know how many customers will be on
Right.
it, but this is based on our actuals for this past year.
Okay, thank you. And so just to summarize, so my understanding is essentially in response to the authorities questioning about what the cost impact might be of moving the 10% discount customers to 5% or 15%, you were estimating that cost using previous actual costs. Is that
Correct.
kind of a correct
Correct.
assessment? Okay.
And then just, that's assuming that they get moved for the full 12-month period. If somebody ends up getting moved and there's only 6 months left in their enrollment,
Mhm.
it's obviously going to be less of a cost.
Right. That's why it's
Either
here
way, yeah.
monthly, because depending on when it happens, it could be only for a month, it could be 2 months, we don't know until we get a little closer.
Right. Okay, thank you. So, so the company has said that you have the ability to see the number of customers whose 12-month enrollment period is expiring over the next kind of 12 months on a monthly basis. So could the company use that information to provide kind of a cost estimate of essentially if you move customers to a 5% or a 15% discount, here's how long each of those customers will be on that kind of artificial discount level over the next 12 months. So just to provide a little bit more detail of what I'm thinking is that, so essentially over the next 12 months, we have customers who were enrolled on the 10% discount, who their 12-month period will be expiring, on a rolling basis over the next 12 months. So my understanding is that people who have been kind of grandfathered into this next rate might be, that amount will be decreasing over the next 12 months, essentially. Does that make sense to you?
Well, see, right now, since we've just started really rolling, this is our first year, the majority of the customers expire about the same time. So they, all of them are about November, December.
Mhm.
We have a few here and there that aren't, but the majority do.
Mhm. Okay.
So,
Thank you.
so if we went live, say, September 2025,
Mhm.
and they're gonna be all expiring in a couple of months or a month, depending on when they actually renew. If we send them their letter and they actually renew right away, they'll be on their new one, so they could possibly maybe get 1 month of extra percentage, or maybe not at all, depending on that timing.
Mhm.
So it's a very much a moving ball, but we do know the majority of our customers expire November, December.
Thank you. And so when you talk about the rolling enrollment, are you referring to the financial hardship re-enrollment process?
Fine, yeah,
Okay, thank
because they
you.
go hand in hand.
So when you are doing the rolling financial hardship enrollment, that is also triggering a new LiDAR enrollment period?
So they go hand in hand.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. So essentially, the majority of your LiDAR customers were enrolled in, or their 12-month enrollment period began in November or December.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last questions are, I guess, can we move to the slide 6? Perfect, thank you. So in the proposed solution, so I just have a few questions about the company's implementation timeline of the modified 5-tier discount rate. So to confirm, is the company's implementation timeline 15 months? Is that still correct?
Yes, no. Yes,
Mhm.
unless we're allowed to also include SCG and CNG so that we can do them all together. And then we're looking at about 18 months.
Okay, thank you. And so under the 15-month timeline, does the company have an estimated month that the new 5-tier discount rate would be implemented?
Well, I think it depends on when we get the decision
Right.
Mhm.
to
We can actually
start the programming for the 5 tiers. So if we are to start, we're still early January. So let's say we were going to start as of February, it would be 15 months from then.
Okay.
If for whatever reason we don't start until May, obviously that moves it out
Mhm.
15 months from then, but
Could be
Right.
July, it could be, our preference would be to start it when the renewal, the majority of the customers would be renewing in that time period. That way it would be really a clean cut from the old to the new.
Mhm.
Have a lot less impact on customers or kind of impact any kind of errors, anything happening.
Okay, thank you. And so given that there is kind of this longer timeline for implementing the 5-tier discount rate, so it's either 15 months or is it 18 months under the kind of combined
Yes.
proposal with SCG and CNG? So given that you have a kind of, the company has a sense of, at potentially, let's say, May 2026 or November 2026, the company will launch this 5-tier discount rate. As customers are enrolling throughout kind of 2025 or 2026, is the company able to enroll customers in a potentially shorter discount rate enrollment period with the understanding that the discount rates will shift on a certain date? So essentially, as customers are enrolling in 2025 and 2026, they'll be made aware by the company that, you know, the structure of the discount tiers will change in, let's say, November 2026. And so you'll have this discount amount for this amount of time, say 3 months, 6 months, et cetera. But it will change in November 2026, et cetera. Does the company have the ability to do that?
Well, we would communicate that out, yes, communicate to the customers of the changes in anticipation of timeline and, or if they're renewing, you know, same thing, a letter letting them know that when you renew, you will be on the new structure, which is, and explain that new structure.
But, or are you looking to say, so if we're going to make the change in November
Mhm.
and I'm enrolled in July on 10%, you're saying only enroll them on 10% until November, and then in November, they change to the new percentage.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
That would take some system programming to make that change, because right now the system is set up to enroll for a full 12-month period.
Mhm.
So if we had to cut that short or go in and somehow change the tier level and the timing of their end date, that would take possibly system programming or a lot of manual effort, which I don't think we could change 28,000 just tier one customers, you know, manually.
Okay, thank you. And so can you provide a little bit more description of when you do implement the 5-tier low-income discount rate, what is the company's process or planned process for transitioning current customers onto the new 5-tier structure?
So I
We
think,
do them one at a time.
well, I
like
think we were
explained.
planning, they would stay for their 12-month period. And then upon renewal, they would then renew under the new tier levels.
Okay, thank you. And so if the implementation of the new 5-tier discount rate structure coincided with the kind of auto renewal process, would that allow the company to then transition, you know, current customers onto the new 5-tier discount rate?
The majority of them probably would be able to then move
Okay.
under the new 5 tiers, yes.
Mm.
But anybody who's staggered those customers that enrolled, you know, after that, say, December
Mhm.
timeframe, would still be able to ride out their 12-month at their existing level, and then
Okay.
upon their renewal, go under their new 5 tiers, whichever 5 of the 5
Mhm.
tiers they qualify for.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, just to clarify a little bit further. So if a customer enrolls in December
Mhm.
and they have a 12-month enrollment period, the company is doing a re-enrollment process every November. So what would a customer
Well, they're
experience
gonna
then?
get their renewal letters
Mhm.
saying that your LIDR is expiring in December. So here you've got, you know, this is your 60-day notice that you're going to expire. So
Mhm.
hopefully they're going to notify us and get us qualifying paperwork again to renew it. So we're not actually just automatically re-enrolling all of those customers
Mhm.
without their notifying us of their qualifying benefit.
Okay. So so in November, you're doing an auto enrollment in financial hardship. That's my understanding. Is that
Well, it's
correct?
not,
Or
but
auto?
it's not really just November, because as these customers, it starts to become rolling,
Mhm.
we'll be renewing all the time. You know, every single month, hopefully, as
Right.
time goes on.
Mhm.
For just right now, the majority of
Okay.
them, since we just started it, are during that time period. As
Mhm.
time goes on, a person can renew, you know, if they set up in July, they'll renew
Right.
next
Mhm.
July. So as time goes on, that will
Right.
spread out and be more so, but we'll be renewing hopefully every single month, all the time.
Right.
as
Okay.
time goes on.
That's a helpful clarification.
Okay.
So essentially,
Yeah.
you began rolling hardship in November of 2023.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know.
So we're on that timeline but
Yes.
things will shift as we move
Yeah.
forward. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so I think that those are essentially all of my questions. We do have a late file exhibit. So specifically, if the company could provide the number of expected enrollment period expirations per month for the next year. Does that make sense? So,
Just number of customers that are expiring each month through 2025.
yes,
Okay.
exactly. Thank you. And so that's one question. And then the second question is, could you then use that information to calculate the cost of transitioning customers to the 5% discount or 15%, but using essentially, you know, the number of customers that are expiring every month. So then essentially just like subtracting that amount from the number of current tier 1 customers. Does that make sense?
It's probably it would be a very rough number because the discount is based on their usage and we'd
Right.
have to use just an average in this
Mhm.
case,
Well, plus we don't know when we'd be going live,
Right.
so it's not.
Right. This would be an example.
Yeah, we could, so would you want, like, say something, like, I guess the example would be if we were to go live, say July of 2026. So
Mhm.
therefore, these customers, say maybe it's the majority are November, they would end up with a, say August, September, October, 3 months possibly of a different discount, something like that, like.
Yes, that would
we could
be
take
great.
Out there to, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay.
Right. Right. So essentially, rather than estimating the cost of moving, 100% of these 10% discount customers for a full 12-month period, kind of
Right.
acknowledging that customers will be moving off of the rate every month. And so having kind of a more potentially accurate picture of what the cost might be.
Okay.
Okay, that'd be
So
good. yeah.
just pick an estimated go live and then calculate that change.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. And we have a drafted version that we'll post as correspondence after this, so you can refer to that after. Okay, great. So those are all of my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Attorney White and Attorney Wheel, the OCC.
Good afternoon. Excuse me, Kim White from the OCC. I apologize because I might have to recover a little ground because I got a little bit lost in some of the testimony, so I do truly apologize. But actually, I'm going to start with the last question that I heard you say. The authority asked you for a late file exhibit, and as I heard you repeat it back to them, you're going to choose an estimated go live date, and then you're going to calculate the, tell me what you're going to do. Actually, that might be easier.
We're going to take an estimated go live date, and then knowing what dates or what months our customers will be expiring in, be able to give an idea of what the extra cost would be if a customer expires, so we go live and they're gonna expire, 2 or 3 months before that, what that number looks like. for
When you say
cost.
expire, do you mean drop off of financial hardship, or do you mean transition to the new tier?
They'd be eligible, their expiration date would be, say, November, right? So we're gonna say, okay, so the 15 customers are going to potentially expire or need to be renewed in November. So those 15 customers would be 3 months on the 15% tier, because based on when we say our go live is.
Okay, so
So
okay,
it's to bridge the gap where they're going to stay on their old tier until we can go live or their expiration date.
I understand. Thank you. And if, just to make sure I understood you correctly, you indicated that your system will be programmed, or maybe it's currently programmed, I guess I'm not uncertain, to, once a customer goes onto a tier, that they will stay on that tier for 12 months?
Correct.
Okay, and
Unless they
so then what you're talking about here in the late file exhibit for the authority, do you have any estimate as to how much it will cost to change your system to accomplish that?
So,
I don't understand.
okay, so somebody is on tier, a 10% tier right now. And when we're ready to shift to our 5 tiers, we're going to assume we're going to move them to 15% until their renewal date to bridge the gap, because we're getting rid of a 10% tier. Okay, so those customers will stay on 15% for, say, the 3 months until they renew.
Okay, and that won't
And so
require,
so
sorry.
that won't require programming, because that will be tied into our 5-tier programming.
Okay.
What would have cost us money would be if they had wanted us to shorten the 12-month enrollment period up to the new go live. So if our go live is September and somebody was going to run until November, and you wanted us to shorten their enrollment by those 2 months, that would cost us programming and money.
understood. But you're saying if you continue with if you make the change relative to the time frame in which it was already supposed to be changed, then that won't cost you
Correct.
anything extra.
Yes.
Okay. And if I understood you correctly, you said you haven't started programming the 5 tiers yet?
No, they have not.
Okay. Okay, and also in some of the discussions that you were having about, kind of the flow of the customers and the timing, you were talking about sending renewal letters and, customers renewing themselves, but that doesn't account for the DSS identified customers, correct? Like do they get renewal letters?
They
Yes.
will, yes.
But if they're being identified by DSS,
We still send them letters.
Un-
once their
well-
time to renew.
Unless they come in again on a DSS
Oh,
file.
right.
That, so as long as they're still on a DSS file, they could get renewed, because we do that 90 days in advance of their expiration. We would renew them and give them a new 12-month period. But if for whatever reason they were no longer identified on the DSS file, then they would receive our renewal letters and go through receiving the 60, 30, 15 day and have to manually recertify themselves.
Okay, so how often are you data sharing with DSS? Is it a monthly?
Monthly.
Monthly,
Monthly.
okay. And if I understood you correctly, what you said there was you're looking at the customer 90 days before what I'm gonna call their expiration
Mhm.
date. And if they show up on the DSS file, then does the new 12, how does the 12 months work with that 90-day period in there? Is
So
there-
if it's within the 90 days, they will renew with a new 12-month period.
As of the 90
as
days,
of
or
the
as of the as of the date they were going to expire from the original 12-month period in the first place? Am I making sense?
Yes, I'm trying to remember that now. I think it renews them after their expiration. So if they were going to expire in December,
They get renewed in December.
they could get renewed 30 days in advance, but their time frame will go December to December again.
Got it.
So it'll be the same time span, but the next year.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Olivia, could you pull up slide 3, please? Thank you. Okay, so, another thing, I was listening to talk about slide 3 earlier and the costs. So slide 3 is monthly costs, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And does this include customers that are on rate RT? Like, have you somehow calculated in the heating cap and the 1,200 additional?
This is all of our customers that were on tier 1, no matter what their rate was.
Okay. Just for my own edification, how do you apply the lighter to rate RT? Like, does it apply to like the first 1,200 kilowatts used, or how does it get applied?
It goes to, yes, it uses the 1,200 kilowatt hour threshold, but it applies to the on-peak hours first, and then it goes to the off-peak, so it will discount their on-peak, the more expensive hours first.
And then if there's something left, it'll go to the off peak.
Okay. Okay, so using numbers just to make sure I understand this, let's assume a customer has 1,900 kilowatt hours usage that month. For the 1,200 were on peak and 700 were off peak.
Okay.
So the 1,200 on peak would get discounted and then 100 of the off peak would get discounted.
Well,
No, it's only 1,200.
1,200
1,200.
total then, okay,
Okay, so if it's 1,900 total, right, and it was 1,200 peak,
got you. Then just
all of the peak would get discounted and none of the off-peak. If it was,
1,100.
yeah, or 1,600 total hours and it was 8 and 8, they'd get 800 peak discounted and then the 400 off-peak.
Okay, understood. So, looking at the slide 3, do you know, and it also, in the slide before it too, so I'm looking at slide 3, but I think I'm also looking at maybe slide 2 as well. From October to November to December, for the column on the box on the left, my left, I guess you're left too. It goes from 28 to 22 to 28. Do you know why it did that valley there?
If I'm not mistaken, the November dropped because a number of customers had come up for renewal and didn't renew, so they fell off of LiDAR in that month, but then a number of them could have ended up renewing into December and then they got back on.
Okay, and so then these would have to be customers that aren't
Not
DSS.
DSS identified.
Do you know what your breakdown of that is now? I recall from the lighter hearings that it was almost 50-50. Do you think it still is
Oh,
customers that are identified through DSS versus customers who identify themselves?
I honestly don't know offhand. I'd have to
Because
go back and look.
Because really our 50-50 is between tier 1 and tier 2. But how many customers are being done on the DSS file
Initially
versus,
identified, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, and just, so just to understand the proposal in slide 6, where you have the 6 bullets,
Mhm.
if you implement, well, if DSS, according to the information in here, is able to begin data sharing in May,
Mhm.
and you haven't started your programming yet, you're not implementing until well after DSS begins data sharing, correct? I mean, there's.
Correct. I mean, even if we started our programming now, we're still going to be
Right,
after DSS, yes.
understood. So there's really no way possible that.
Correct, that we would start at the same time.
So then if DSS's data sharing is already implemented by the time you implement your 5 tiers, are the steps that you're talking about here? Explain to me the necessity of the steps of moving someone to moving a tier, a 10% person to 15%. If DSS is able to tell you what percent they need to be on,
No, it's our system. We can't have more than one percentage for a particular tier. So if we have tier 1 is 10%, but now tier 1 is going to be really 5%, we can't have, we have to decide where those people are going to go. It doesn't have anything to do with the DSS file.
We can't
Like it-
have that extra, we can't have 6 percentages in the system. We can only have the 5. So
understood.
if we have to get rid of the 10%, we have to move them somewhere.
I do understand. So my point being though is I think DSS will be telling you or to, at that point, by the time you've implemented your 5 tiers,
Mhm.
for all of the customers coming in through DSS will be telling you what tier they should be in the 5 tiers. So
Okay.
you don't really have to guess at them, correct? Like you're getting the information directly from DSS.
Right, if they're on the DSS.
And if they're coming in through, I'm sorry, you're getting.
Yeah.
If they're coming in through themselves, then they would have given you their income information.
Yes.
So you
But-
would equally know what tier they should be on that way too, right?
Well, but that information is not, so DSS, yes, it comes in on the file and it tells us this customer is tier 3.
Uh-huh.
Somebody who comes in and self-identifies, yes, we're going to see the document that's going to tell us where they would fall in the tier. But if it's prior to us implementing, so because the tiers are changing, so somebody who is currently a tier 1 could potentially be a tier 2 or a tier 3, let's say. I'm not going to know what it was that qualified them for tier 1 before what tier that would now qualify them for, because that doesn't get stored in our system. So whatever they gave us, they're going to look at the document and say, oh, okay, yes, this qualifies that customer for 10% or 50% or whatever it might be, so that they can check off that they get enrolled in that tier. But we don't have anything that says, oh, their income was this range, or a field to say that they gave us this benefit. That's not stored on their customer record.
Okay, I understand. Actually, hearing officer, may I ask for a late file exhibit since?
Sure, it'll be late file exhibit 42.
So I think you had said a minute ago when I was asking you about if you know how many customers are identified by DSS, we were having that conversation. That's what I'd like to know. How many customers on each tier are identified by DSS or through their own self-certification, I'll call it?
So both, how many DSS and how many
For each tier, for
okay.
each current tier.
for each tier?
I'm assuming
Okay.
you don't break it down further.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Tom Wheel. Just a couple of follow-up questions. So it sounds like to follow up on what Attorney White was just talking about, it sounds like for DSS identified customers, those customers, as soon as the 5 tiers are implemented and live, they could be transferred to their new tier if applicable, right? Like the current tier 1 customer you're referencing before, who might be a tier 3, you might know that month, like within a month's time, because of the DSS data match, that they should be tier 3. Whereas if that customer were not DSS data matched, you're not going to know whether they should be tier 3 until the expiration of their current status when they have to reapply. Is that correct?
Correct. Or if they contact us in between and offer up their documentation to upgrade,
Okay.
which they can do at any time.
Thank you. And you mentioned before that that you wouldn't be able to start implementing, that you wouldn't be done with the programming, I think, before DSS is expected to be ready by May. What's the timeline for your programming to be ready?
It's 15 months.
15 months and/or 18 months, depending on the
Right.
decision.
Sorry, I remember you said that before. 18 months for if C and GSCG is allowed also? Okay. And would there be any effect, let's say, I don't want to suggest that our friends at DSS won't be ready by May, but let's say that they maybe aren't ready until June. Would that have any impact at all? Like would DSS's, as long as DSS's data is ready by the time the programming is ready, is there any kind of impact on the timeline?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as they're ready when we are, we're good.
Okay. And that, we talked before, Attorney White verified that the estimate before was a monthly estimate. So, and I heard the caveat that there's not really, that it is an estimate, because there's not really any way to know that in any given month in the future, how many people would be on either tier, on any given tier. But just so I understand, in an impossible future where none of that data changes, it would cost about $2.435 million a month to shift everybody to the 15%.
No,
It would
that's
be-
the total for the whole year, the 2 million,
That's per year.
yeah,
It would be an extra 2.4 million.
right. But if it's only a couple of months, the time period, it could be
I see.
maybe, 500,000. It depends on the timing.
Gotcha. Okay. That's better for me. I was
Yeah,
I was reading those.
The 2.4 is the max.
Yeah, that would be if the whole year we had to do it, but which of course we don't anticipate that.
Okay. Thank you. And I noticed, at least I read, and I won't ask you to speak for Eversource's presentation, but it was clearer to me from Eversource's presentation, it seemed like the company kind of it was similarly kind of laying out in response to the authorities' questions, here's what would happen if we shifted everybody to 5%, here's versus 15%. But it seemed to me that Eversource had a proposal, like a recommendation. It wasn't as clear to me that UI has a recommendation. Does the company have a preference or a recommendation of whether the best path forward would be to move people who are currently on the 10% to 5 or 15?
It just either cost savings or not. Thinking about the impact to the customer would be, the impact would be better if we went to the 15, of course, because that would help them out more. But going to the 5, of course, helps out ratepayers and so it's a 5 of one and 5 of another. But to do it programming wise, or it doesn't matter either way, which way we go, or system wise.
Okay. And has the company considered a path of just maintaining the current 2 tiers until the 15 or 18 month period when the 5 tiers programming is completed, like not making any change at all until the entire system is complete?
Well, we would only be shifting the customers when we're ready to implement those 5 tiers. So we would be maintaining our 2 tiers until we're ready to go live. And that's when we would make the shift
Okay.
for the customers.
I think I did understand that and I.
No, that's okay.
My last question, and I, just curious, and I'm sure we'll find out soon enough, but do you happen to know roughly what the cost of the low income discount rate for 2024 is looking like, the actual cost so far?
Oh, for the whole year?
Yeah. Well, I assume December 2024 bills haven't all come in yet, so I'm sure that number isn't
Right, right,
finalized,
We don't
but
have the December numbers yet. But we up until, so are we talking about for all of our customers, right? For all both?
yeah,
tiers?
well, yeah,
We were up to, let's see. Have a number for, yeah, just seeing if I can get online here. So far for 2024, not including December, we are at $33,624,652.
thank you.
So even if we assume another, what, 3.4 million
Yeah.
for December?
Maybe 36 million approximately.
Okay. Thank you. That was our last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does Deep have any questions? Thank you. Attorney O'Hare, does Eversource have any questions? No. Does EOE have any questions? And lastly, does the Center for Children's Advocacy have any questions?
Thank you very much for the information. I want to revisit one of the things that Attorney White was raising around customers who had fallen off. Do you have data around, first of all, the number of customers who were removed from DSS programs, who were therefore removed from their LIDR rate?
Won't have that yet.
Well, and we also wouldn't know specifically whether it was a DSS program that didn't get renewed, or if it was just that they didn't self-certify again.
Well,
We would only know that they did not renew.
So but if they're on a DSS program, they shouldn't have to self-certify because you get that data through DSS.
Correct.
So my question and my concern is those customers who are no longer, for whatever reason, and I think sometimes it's questionable why they've been removed from a DSS program because there are so many eligibility factors. So if you have that data for a late file exhibit, I would like to see how many customers are no longer either certified for hardship or on their LIDR rate because of removal from a DSS program.
I'm not sure that we can. Yeah, I don't know that we can get that, but we can look into whether we can or not.
Is there a reason you couldn't get that information? Because you'll have from DSS which customers have been, removed because they've been removed from the DSS program.
But we have a delay in that removal, so if on a file, they're not on it, and then the next month they are on it, we wouldn't have removed them. So it would have to be a couple of months worth of files before we would remove them. But it also could have been removed because they moved, and then they're back on. So we're not gonna know that removal is only because they got removed from one address and then set back up on another address.
But you would have
Don't
that
know the
information
difference.
in terms of your file. You understand what data we're trying to get? If
Mhm.
people are removed from DSS programs, you know, what's happening in terms of their hardship status and in terms of their LIDR participation?
But that's what I'm saying. So they could have been removed not because they may show as removed because they moved, not because they got removed from the file.
But if, I mean, you know your processes more than I do, but if they've been removed, then they're going to get notification, correct? Because we've had lots of conversations about
Well,
that.
not if they move from one location to another. So they're technically not removed, but they have a different account. So in the system, it shows it ending because they had this account. Now it's a new account at their new address. So it appears like they got removed when they really didn't get removed because they've been reinstated at a new location.
But I can't imagine that all the customers who have.
No,
been
but we can't tell the
removed
difference.
are
is our
removed
problem.
simply because they've changed address.
No,
So
Oh, but so-
that's the information.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, we'll look
Yeah,
into see
we can see what we
get.
can do, but
Okay, that would be very helpful.
Mhm.
Similarly, do you
Excuse me.
have, it's also data around customers who have not recertified? Have you had customers on LIDR who their period has now terminated and they have to recertify for LIDR, who have not been identified through DSS?
yes, so a customer will get a renewal letter 60 days prior to their expiration. And then they'll get a letter 30 days prior to, if they haven't done anything off the 60-day letter, and then they'll get a 15-day letter. So they have up to 2 months to recertify prior to their expiration.
So can we, as a late file exhibit, get the data around how many customers who weren't identified through DSS data sharing, who were on LIDR, who have now been removed? And all those timeframes have passed.
Yes.
Right, well, it's hard because they may have dropped and then 15 days after or not 15 days, but, a period of time after we removed them, they could have now recertified, so now they're back on again. So it's a constantly moving. We can see what kind of data we can pull. It's not black and white, really.
And that's always the issue with termination notices going out. It's just when people get in that situation, how long it is, why is there that gap?
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Sure.
I just want to ensure that I have the late file exhibits that you're requesting. So is it just one late file exhibit, which would be late file exhibit 43? How many customers who were not identified through DSS data sharing, but rather were identified through the companies or CAAs or some other mechanism that were removed because of information received through DSS data sharing?
So there's two. There's one is those who were on a DSS program, were identified through DSS data sharing, received an LIDR rate, but were now removed from the DSS program. So therefore were removed from hardship status and the LIDR rate. So that's the first one. Am I being clear? I might not be.
I think you're being clear. I'm just,
Okay.
how many customers that were identified through DSS data sharing and put on their appropriate tier who were then removed as a result of DSS data sharing?
Were removed from a DSS program, which impacts their eligibility. So therefore, they're no longer eligible for hardship status, their LIDR rate.
Okay.
Okay.
That will be late file exhibit 43, and then late file exhibit 44 is the second one, which is how many customers were not identified through DSS data sharing that were removed because of information submitted.
They had not been, they weren't part of the program through DSS. They were on LIDR that has expired and they have not done the appropriate renewal certification.
Okay, thank you.
And then my last question is, do you have data around, so if customers are exceeding the cap and therefore limiting how much of that expense can be, how much of the discount rate, do you have data around those customers who have exceeded the cap?
What kind of data? We know who those customers are.
Right, so how many customers are exceeding the cap?
Each month, because of course it varies.
Right.
Yes, yes, we have that.
Yep, okay, yeah, so as a late file exhibit,
For each month then, for each
Pardon?
month of 2024, how
Yes.
many customers exceeded?
yes.
Didn't we already report that?
It,
Late file exhibit 45 to mine.
Right.
I'm getting it.
How many customers each month
Exceeding.
exceeded their
usage.
usage cap? For
We
2024?
may have reported that
Yeah, I think we did.
in the annual LIDR reporting, but we'll check.
Great, thank you. And then finally, I just have one clarification. I think, Ms. Wasselneck, you said that if a customer is on a certain rate, they stay in that rate for 12 months, even though their eligibility for a higher rate might change, but because they're in this program for a year, they wouldn't get the different discount until their next year?
No, they would get, so if they came in as a tier 1, let's say they came off the DSS file, we'll use that as an example, and we automatically enroll them in tier 1. They can contact us with their proof that they qualify for a tier 2 right now for 50%. They would upgrade to the 50%. Okay, so they came in November. In January, they sent us proof that they qualify for the 50%. They would get upgraded to the 50% when they sent us in that paperwork.
Even if, does the customer who's identified through data sharing have to proactively inform you, or do you do that
No.
automatically?
They,
as you
no,
get
they
it?
have to send it to us. They have to notify us that they would now qualify for tier 2. That was part of the decision.
So even though you have the data from DSS, they still have to proactively do that?
Yes, that was part of the decision. Yeah.
How about the next year when you're getting the verification from DSS again? They have to proactively tell you that their income has changed?
So we have now, so they initially came in, got coded as tier 1. They upgraded to tier 2. Now they're coming in for their renewal. As long as DSS is saying that they are still at tier 2, they will get renewed for tier 2.
But how about if they start off at tier 1 and now they're you're getting different information in terms of income eligibility that next year? Are you going to change the tier, or do you wait for the customer to do something
So
proactive?
if we upgraded them, so assuming that we're staying at just the 2 tiers.
Assuming you haven't upgraded them, but now
Okay.
you're getting that renewal for the next year, and DSS is telling you that their income has changed or that their eligibility has
No,
changed.
anything off of a DSS file is only enrolled in tier 1, regardless of what they qualify for.
Okay, even going,
Unless we've upgraded them, and now the renewal, they still maintain that tier, that higher tier. That's the only time we'll keep them.
in the new tier. Okay, all right, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. My first question is, would UI be able to estimate what the programming cost would be to shorten a customer's 12-month enrollment period so that the enrollment period ends when UI implements the 5-tier LiDAR? So for example, if UI is planning to implement 5-tier LiDAR July of 2026, but you enroll somebody in January of 2026, is there a way to program it so that their enrollment period ends when the 5-tier LiDAR is implemented?
Yeah, we would have to go back to IT and see what the timeline and the cost would be.
Could I request that as a late file? And that'd be late file exhibit 46.
So just so I understand, so you would like a cost to so that when we switch to the new 5 tiers, how much it would cost if we were to end everyone and start them all new on the new 5 tiers?
Mhm.
Okay.
And another question, and this is sort of an alternative approach, would UI be able to, let's see, second. As a lower cost option, would UI be able to communicate to customers that when they're enrolled, they will be on, let's say, the 10% LiDAR for X number of months, however many months until UI implements the 5-tier LiDAR, at which point they will be moved to whatever the appropriate new 5-tier LiDAR is?
I mean, we can communicate that in general, saying that currently you're, explain that you were on tier 1, which was 10%. You've been moved to a 5% tier and then, what that estimated timeline would be based on our go live. Just so that they know that, okay, for the next 3 months, you're only going to be getting a 5%. However, in say July 2026, we have information that you really are a tier 2, which is now 15%. So we can explain that we're going to have to get that information. See, it's going to depend too if you're a DSS customer or a self-declared customer, because we're not going to know their income if they are eligible for that tier 2, which is 15%, until they give us their information. So it's going to would have to be different communications depending on how they've been declared, and communicate those two different, whether it's DSS or a self-declared
Right,
customer.
not knowing what tier they might upgrade
Right.
to or downgrade to.
Yeah, we can think about that more, but yes, I mean, I'm sure we could come up with communication. Just would have to really think about what's the best way to communicate that clearly.
Okay, and is there any way that UI could collect the income data in 2025 and 2026?
Customers
We just have no, we
supply
have
it.
no way to store that.
Okay. And would there be an additional cost to communicate that information to customers?
The cost of the mailing. If we, obviously we would try to communicate through email if we have email addresses on file, but anybody that we needed to actually send a physical letter to, it would be the cost to print and mail postage.
Okay. So could I have that as, that would be late file exhibit 47.
So you're looking for,
The
Communication
if you were to communicate to customers that they'll be on, let's say the 10% LiDAR until, or however many months it is until UI implements the 5-tier LiDAR, at which point UI will move them to the new 5-tier, applicable 5-tier.
so it's the
LiDAR.
cost to communicate it.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that'll be an estimate, but. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any redirect?
No, no redirect necessary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. for the
Thank you.
presentation. Good afternoon, Attorney O'Hare. Would you like to introduce your witnesses and have them adopt their pre-filed materials? I believe both of them have been previously sworn in.
Sure. Jessica Brahini Kane and Vice President of Customer Operations and Assistance Programs.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Trainer. I'm the Director of Collections and Low-Income Programs for Eversource.
Yes.
No.
No.
Yes, I do.
And then did you sponsor Discover Response December 23rd?
Yes.
Yes.
Do not. Yes, I do.
Okay. Thank you for this time and a happy new year to you. Just to give some context, after our Avangrid partners have finished, we have a different timeline for Eversource. And so I think some of the questions are the same, but some of the concepts might not be as relevant. So we do plan to implement the 5-tier discount rate next month. We are in testing right now. DSS has said their preliminary estimate to implement the automated monthly DSS data matching for financial hardship is May. And so what we need is just a decision on where to put the customers who are currently on the 10%, because that won't exist once we implement the 5 tiers. And so Dan can walk through that analysis and the costs. And then we would share, it is time sensitive to get the clarity, especially if the actual percent discounts for the 5 tiers are going to change, because we're ordered to send customer communication about the structure
of the LIDR 30 days in advance of implementing. So we have that ready to go. We were waiting for this hearing. We would have already started if that was certain. So that doesn't tell specific customers what they will be going on. The order was inform customers about the structure. So hopefully that context makes sense. And without further ado, I'll have Dan go through our PowerPoint.
Great. Thank you, Jess. So just quickly to go through a little bit of background, what our current LIDR enrollments are, some of the scenarios and proposals that were discussed earlier and discussed in our motion, and then the DSS implementation that Jess had just mentioned. Next slide. So the background, so in November on the 20th, PURA issued a modified LIDR decision, which ordered a 5-tier LIDR with the tiers being 5, 15, 20, 40, and 50%. Subsequently, after reviewing that decision, Eversource filed motion 98 to address a few things in that decision that we needed some clarification on. In the original proposed decision before the final, it did have the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% discounts, and the 10% was eliminated, which brings us here today. We need to figure out what do we do with these 10% customers, right? And then subsequently, any new customers that DSS enrolled currently, as we know, we're required to put everybody from the DSS list on the current tier 1 10%. What do we do with those customers going forward that are on the DSS list? Do we move them to 5? Do we move them to 15? What do we do with those customers, the new customers? So those are the decisions we're looking for with those two different scenarios and where to move those customers. So for our current discount rate enrollment, so this is the 2-tier discount. We have about 55% of our customers, our 204,000 customers on LIDR on tier 1. So that's 113,000, and then 91,000 customers on tier 2. So as you can see from the chart, we had that big jump up in June. Obviously, that's when the DSS list came in, where we enrolled a large number of customers that weren't already on the discount rate on the LIDR. And we've moved a little bit up and down since then, but have remained relatively flat over the last couple months in the 200 to 204,000 customer range. And every new month, we get about 3,700 customers enrolling in tier 1 every month. So that's new customers. That doesn't include customers that drop off or anything like that. It's just new customers. And when we looked at that, we thought it was helpful to look at that after DSS data sharing, because anything before that doesn't really apply to today's world. So we looked from June through November with the DSS list to see how many customers were enrolling new every month. Next slide, please. So the scenario 1 in our motion 98 proposal is the one-time transition from current tier 1 10%. And what do we do with those customers? So our proposal is to move them to tier 2 15%, because and as we said throughout this docket in the proceeding, is we don't want to do any harm to customers. We don't want to lower their discount that they've been receiving until it comes time for their renewal. If they qualify for something lower, then at that point they would decrease their discount, but midstream they could only upgrade their discount. They couldn't downgrade it. So following that same notion, that was behind this proposal.
Yep, just to amplify that for clarity, because I know there were some questions with Avangrid on the same. So a customer cannot, one of our guiding principles and one of the PURA directives earlier on was that a customer within the 12 months of their financial hardship period, they should not be downgraded. They can only upgrade, including if DSS comes in and provides additional documents that say they're eligible for something less. They're supposed to stay on, our interpretation was they stay on that higher discount until the end of the 12-month financial hardship verification period. And each time you provide financial hardship documentation to CAAs or us, that could increase your tier as well as DSS as well.
Yeah, and just to add, in our proposal, that expiration date wouldn't restart with this transition. We would keep their expiration date. So if they were gonna expire, in May already, say they qualified through the DSS list last year, in May, and we would move them to 15% in February timeframe, and then they would get the renewal letters for their expiration in May, and then they would transition to whatever discount they would qualify for at that point in the new 5-tier. So it wouldn't restart their 12 months. We would keep that date that they already have. Now, if we look at the table on the bottom, this outlines the estimated monthly cost. So today, in the middle at the 10%, our current monthly cost for the entire 10% bucket is $2.1 million. Now, on the 5%, the first row there, if you cut that cost in half, it's $1 million less. On the 15%, you'd add essentially 50% of the cost from the 10% timeframe or 10% discount, and it's about $1 million, $1.1 million higher every month compared to the current 10% today. And that 10% is based on actual costs experienced from June through November. Again, ignoring the time prior to the DSS list, because those costs were much less and just not what it is today in reality. Next slide, please. So the second scenario is what we mentioned earlier, the new DSS customers coming in. And what do we do with those customers? So we're going to be implementing in February. We talked about DSS, and they're targeting mid-May for implementation on the 5-tier data sharing. So there's a few months in between where we'll have 5 spots open for the discount, but we won't have the 5 tiers coming in from DSS. But we'll still have the information coming with the 2 tiers from DSS. So it's what do we do with those customers that are coming in through DSS? And our proposal is to anybody that comes in at tier 2 to DSS, we know they're not tier 1, is to put them on the 15% going forward. And then eventually, once the DSS list is available, May, June, whenever that comes in, we would upgrade anybody that would qualify for tiers 2, 3, or really 3, 4, and 5 at that point. So kind of an interim period where only tier 2 customers would move, old tier 2 would move to the 15%. And the cost for that today, so these are the monthly new enrollments. These are the 3,700 customers I mentioned earlier. So today, 3,700 customers, the cost is approximately $65,000 a month. Again, half of that, $32,000, give or take, for the 5%, and then for 15%, it's a $32,000 on top of that. So about $100,000 a month, and depending on how many months you go, this is the incremental monthly cost. So month 1, you're $97,000, call it $100,000. Month 2, now you're $200,000 because you still have the customers from month 1, and then you have a new set of 3,700 customers from month 2. So depending on how long that goes, it will increase every month.
Dan walked me through this part this morning too. So for example, if we implement the 5-tier low-income discount rate in February, and then in May, DSS implements the 5-tier data matching. So that's 4 months. So 4 months with the incremental 3,700 customers each month. It's incremental each month. So it's about $300,000 of additional cost to fund this between the time we implement the low-income discount rate and the 5-tier DSS data matching for ballpark. We don't have insight into supply prices shouldn't change between then, but that helps.
Thank you, Jess. Next slide, please. And then just a note on the expiration. So anytime a customer will upgrade to, just talk today's world from tier 1 to tier 2 by them either going to a community action agency or coming to Eversource and providing us their household income, they receive a new 12-month period. So it doesn't just make them tier 2 50% for the remaining 12 months they already had. It kicks off a whole new 12-month period so they can continue and receive that higher benefit for 12 months. Now, when we transition to the 5-tier, as I said earlier, we can set any expiration date as part of this transition or keep their current expiration date. So if they expire May 25th today, then they're going to expire May 25th after the transition. So we just wanted to make that clear that that's something we have the ability to do there. I think that's all we had. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Authority staff, Jenna Vigras, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. To start off, I'm wondering if we could move back to slide 4. Which is the 30s, yes, one. There you go. Perfect, thank you. So just to confirm for myself, so this, the average of 3,700 customers that are newly enrolling on tier 1 per month, that average was calculated using only enrollment data between June and December 2024. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I know I asked this with Avangrid, but does the company have kind of an explanation for why you're having about 3,700 new customers enrolling every month, but the actual enrollment per month is not shifting all that much, kind of between 190,000 and 200,000 customers?
Yeah, it's when a customer moves out. So this is only showing active customers at the time. So if customers move out of their location or somebody else moves into location, then they're no longer counted in actually receiving the discount. And some customers can shift to tier 2 as well.
Right.
So,
And Ms. Vigras, it might help as well. So this is newly enrolled because that was explicitly the question. If it's net new, that's a different question because that would account for the people who've moved out or their financial hardship verification has expired. But this one's just the new.
Right. Thank you. And similarly with Avangrid, can Eversource track specifically the customers that enrolled in each month? So not just kind of, I know this number of customers enrolled in December of 2023, but I know it's these specific customers that enrolled in December 2023 versus January 2024, et cetera.
yes, we have that data.
Okay, thank you. And going off of that, does the company also know the customers that are having their 12-month enrollment period expire each month, like January 2025, February 2025, et cetera?
Yes, we have that as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, can we move to the next slide? All right, so thank you for walking us through this. So I just wanted to clarify this information a little bit further. So this table that's at the bottom, just to clarify, so this monthly cost is estimating moving all of the current 10% customers onto 5% or 15%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the monthly cost, is that's averaging kind of all of the costs of the past, you said between June until December, and that's providing the estimated monthly cost?
Yeah, June to November, we didn't have December's data yet fully when we did this. So yeah, the 10% is the average. So the 2.1 million you see is 10%. That's actual average from June through November.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So as I was asking Avangrid earlier, given that the company knows kind of the number of customers that are having their 12-month enrollment period expire each month, let's say over the next 12 months, is the company able to use that information to estimate the cost of moving customers to 5% versus 15%, let's say over the next 12 months, with the understanding that customers, so as I was saying earlier, so my understanding is that you have people who have enrolled every month, And so then you then have people who are going to re-enroll every month and will shift onto the 5-tier discount. So my understanding is that over the next 12 months, you'll have customers that were enrolled on the 10% discount, but that number is steadily kind of declining over the next 12 months of people who are kind of artificially on 15% or 5%. Does that make sense?
Thank you for the question. Eligible for the current 10% might be, is different than who would be going on the 10% because it won't exist. No 10% will exist after next month. Did that answer part of the question?
So essentially what I'm trying to understand is your proposal is to move customers onto the 15% discount that are currently on 10%. But over the next 12 months, you're going to have people coming in every month to re-enroll. And at that point, you will move them onto the new 5-tier discount rate. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. And so essentially over the next 12 months, you'll have fewer and fewer people that were artificially placed onto 15%, but might be eligible for 5%, et cetera, like for the remainder of their 12-month enrollment period.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to look at that. We would know, when those customers that were moving from 10% to 15 or 5 or wherever would expire. The one thing I do want to caution with that is once the DSS list goes in, if a customer is going to be then upgraded from there, because now we know, okay, they're on 15%, but they really belong at 40% or 50%, they'd be moved right there. So there would be a large number of customers that would move from 15% to some other percent higher than that. You'll still have kind of the scenario you're talking about, but to a lesser scale. We don't know what that scale is until we receive the DSS list. But we can provide the number of customers that are going to be expiring over the next year. How to analyze that, it's kind of up in the air with what the DSS list is going to tell us. And if that comes in May or June, then after that, every month you're going to lose some of those customers off the 15% or 5%, wherever this goes.
If I could supplement that, so when their annual expiration date is, if we almost think of it as a renewal date, many will renew, and I think that might be what you're saying is as well. So the for this calendar year in 2025, by moving everybody from 10% to 15%, it'll cost significantly less than it will in 2026 and future years in steady state, because in steady state, we'd be using all the 5 tiers, and the ones who would be going to the 15 would also be going to all the other higher discounts. So it's basically this year as a one-time thing has to be less than if it was the steady state annual cost. Okay.
And maybe here's something different to consider too, is one thing we can do, which might have a better way to show this, is look at the DSS list, look at the customers who are truly a tier 1 customer from DSS that were moving to the 15%, and say, all right, of those customers, what percent, percentagize it, and then what percent of those customers are receiving the higher discount for X period of time. That might be a little bit of a better analysis that we can do.
I appreciate that. Yes, that would be great. Perfect. All right, so
that'll be late file exhibit 48.
yes. Thank you. And as I said earlier, we have a drafted version of the late file request that we can post after this meeting. Perfect. Can we move to the next slide, Laura? Great, thank you. So I appreciate you walking us through this table and Ms. Kane providing a little bit more detail. So I wanted to clarify, so this, for the table that's here, is that calculating moving all eligible tier 2 customers to the 15%? I guess, could you just provide a little bit more detail about what's being calculated here?
Yeah, so this is just, so when we get the DSS list today, it says either tier 1 or tier 2. So once 5 tiers are in, tier 1, if DSS tells us tier 1 and they're a new customer, we're going to put them at the 5%, right? There's no question about that. They're tier 1, the new 5% is in there. They shouldn't be anything different. But if they say they're tier 2, then we know they're not 5%, but we know they're tier 2, 3, 4, or 5. So giving them the greater 15% discount than the current directive, which would put them on the 5%, is our proposal for that.
Right. So is this table showing us moving both kind of the tier 1 customers to 5% and then the tier 2 customers to 15%, or?
This is just the new enrollment. So this is assuming all new enrollments are tier 2, which from the DSS list, 90% of them are current 50% tier 2. So the vast majority of those would be tier 2. So this is the 3,700 new tier 1 enrollments we receive a month.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow up on the comment that it's an incremental kind of 3,700 customers and incremental cost associated with that. But to clarify, so that is not accounting for customers that are dropping off of.
Correct.
So it's an incremental cost, but also understanding that there are costs being removed because customers are no longer on the discount rate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great, thank you. And then finally, I just want to confirm, so the company has the capacity to move a customer to the 15% tier, but maintain their original 12-month enrollment expiration date.
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I think those are all of my questions, and the late file exhibit would be very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney White, Attorney Wheel.
Excuse me. Good afternoon. Kim White for OCC. I think I just have a few questions. So clarifying again, you said that changing a customer's tier doesn't mean that you reset their 12-month period. So go ahead.
Yes, as part of this transition, yes. If a customer is on tier 1 today and they upgrade to tier 2 tomorrow, that will reset their time frame.
Got it.
But not as part of this transition. We plan to keep whatever their current expiration date is.
Okay. So then looking at that relative to the costs in slide 5, page 5 of the PDF, the $1.1 million, then we know it would be for certain approximately 4 months, right? Because we know that's the difference between when you go live and when you get the DSS data sharing. So then it's 4 months, and then at that point, we're going to kind of trickle, it would trickle through the renewal date. I like that word better, actually, than for the customers over the course of the next 12 months.
Yeah, so at the point when the DSS list comes in, the 5-tier, a lot of those customers would move to whatever their real tier should be, right? So at that point, we're going to upgrade those that qualify, but you'll still have some of those tier 1 customers, today tier 1, that moved to 15% that need to, eventually renew down the line. That will do that. And I think that analysis that we were talking with Mrs. Vigrass about using the DSS list and comparing it to the customers we currently have. So who are those true tier 1 customers that are going to be moving to 15%, and what are those expiration dates? I think that'll help us with kind of a better insight into what that cost will be over the next 12 months versus kind of this table.
Okay.
But yeah, until the DSS list is in, moving to 15% is an extra 1.1 million a month.
1.1 million a month, and that's great. Pay your dollars, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Hi, Tom Wheel, also from the Office of Consumer Counsel. I don't ever know how to introduce myself when I go second. I have some like boneheaded questions. It's like get confused by this stuff easily. So just I'll ask some questions and you let me know if I have this wrong. One of the principal problems we're trying to solve is that there's no more 10% discount once the 5 tiers are set up. And there are kind of 2 groups of people we need to solve that problem for. The people who are already enrolled in the LiDAR, for whom we don't want to lower their discount. But then there are also the people who will be coming in once the 5 tiers are set up, but prior to the DSS. And am I right so far?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And those 2 groups of the 2 tables in your presentation, the first one that's like $1 million a month, that addresses that first group of people, the people who are currently enrolled in LiDAR. And the second one is the proposal for the second group of people, meaning the set that people who are not yet enrolled in LiDAR, once the company's established the 5 tiers, it'll start by enrolling those people identified as tier 1 and 5%, tier 2 and 15%, pending the DSS identification, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry,
Got
I'm
it.
sure everyone else in the whole room understood that. I just wanted to make sure I did. Thank you. Again, without suggesting one way or the other, what DSS will do, has the company considered like a plan B if something goes wrong and data matching doesn't happen, maybe like for like an entire year longer than expected?
Well, customers can still enroll in any of the 5 tiers through either coming to us, Eversource, and giving us their, either whatever benefits they're receiving or their income, or they can do the same thing through community action agencies. They'll have the ability to enroll them through for any of the 5 tiers.
Okay. And you said this before, but I also just want to make sure I understand the company's policy. And I think Ms. Kane, you might have said before that it's the company's reading of the authority's order. Is that essentially that even if the company receives information that someone is on a too generous a discount, maybe that's the word to use, that the discount wouldn't be adjusted to reflect that until the expiration date of the plan they're currently on?
Correct. No decreases in the discount percent within that 12-month from enrollment period.
Okay. So I asked this question of UI, and after it came out of my mouth and I heard their response, I was confused about why I asked it, and I realized after I sat down that I was thinking of it was a question for you, which was, has the company considered not doing anything at all to resolve this problem of what to do pending DSS data coming out? In other words, even after the company's established the 5 tiers, maintaining the 2-tier system until the DSS framework is completed.
Thank you for that question. We do not have a way to, once we implement the 5 tiers, we don't have, could you ask the question again? Let me just see if I.
Sure. I meant more, and I guess I hadn't considered whether it's technically possible. I was assuming that it's technically possible. I'll back up, and I don't know anything about computers. So I assumed it was technically possible to kind of fully bake the 5 tiers, but not hit the submit button to fully implement it, to kind of have it ready to go, but not trigger it until DSS is ready, and until that time maintain the status quo.
So we hadn't considered that, but what that would do is solve the second problem, the second scenario, where you have the new customers come in. So now if we did that and waited till we got the DSS list, then the second scenario, we can put them on whatever tier they're supposed to be on, the newly enrolled customers. But we still have the scenario one where they're on 10%, where we only have the 5 slots to put in the percents, and that goes away. So unless there's a decision to put back 10% in, then there's no way to keep the customers on 10%.
I'll offer that, coming from a former boss called it the propeller head area, the first decade of my career was in the IT. It is, oh, and there we go. There's the propeller head gone. The holding off on that implementation, so they're designing it and testing it now. If you keep it in a test environment, then just other things behind it get clogged up, so then your cost increases, and then you have to remobilize a team. So there'd be a cost and duration incremental by doing that. I think we when we saw OCC's comment in December, we were also optimistic that DSS would be ready prior to that. Oh, the other piece from an IT perspective, whenever possible, we like to avoid a big bang. So if you can break things into baby pieces so that you can observe each IT implementation separately, because there's a lot of change, it helps you tease out where the problems are. Just Occam's razor for like whatever change. So I think it's preferable. The discount rates is, the 5-tier is very complicated to implement. So I'd rather have those separate anyway, just to minimize the risk of that big IT implementation. But it's a fair question.
Thanks. I have another question, and it's another question where I'm hoping you can just let me know if I have this right. And I think it's kind of a question in principle. So the reason it might make sense to do that, to maintain the status quo until DSS is ready, is because you would, in principle, avoid a scenario where you're giving a 15% discount to people who ultimately will be eligible for a 5% discount. So in principle, there's some savings to ratepayers. But I guess my question is it also true that in principle, by delaying the kind of part B of the company's plan, in other words, if you maintain the status quo and new people are enrolling now, you're also enrolling people at a 10% discount who could potentially ultimately be eligible for a 5% discount. So it's not necessarily the case that there'd be a 100%, that the arguable cost to ratepayers that I mentioned before isn't offset somehow by that kind of competing cost. Does that make sense?
It does. I would expect that the incremental IT cost to shift would be significantly lower than the monthly cost to customers to fund it. So from a customer cost perspective, it would reduce. It'd be a lower cost to wait until DSS goes in, and then customers wouldn't be able to benefit from the other tiers. But
okay. That was going to be my other question too, as a follow-up to the incremental kind of baby steps thing. Is it, again, without knowing anything about IT, I was going to ask it because it sounds to me from the outset like the proposal right now is there to be sort of 2 projects, and I understand that there's the primary project of creating the 5 tiers, but the proposal now would be to kind of, once the 5 tiers are in place, to do project 1 of taking current tier 1 and dealing with those people and keeping current tier 2 where they are. And then later down the line, after DSS data comes in, getting into project 2, which would be dividing up the current 50% folks into their applicable other tiers, as opposed to kind of doing it all as one project once DSS data comes in. So I was curious whether there's a cost differential between those 2 projects, or I guess a fairer question is, am I wrong to think of it that way, that it's kind of a difference of kind of 2 sets of work versus 1?
it's helpful on the, and Dan, you can keep me honest on this one, but for setting at the time of implementation to move customers from the 10% to something, whether it's 5% or 15%, it's like a big Excel spreadsheet doing a find and replace.
Yep.
Not as easy as that, but it's not a coding. It's not coding. It's just changing, like data hammering it, is what we call it. The interim default, it's a default that we're setting so that if that is code, and I don't know if it's a code or where,
No,
it's just
same
a
process.
monthly, same process, yeah. So they're two separate data, neither one is a significant IT effort or cost currently, it's just decisions.
Okay. So creating the tiers is the major IT
Yes.
expense, but sorting people between tiers is not a major IT expense, sounds like. Okay.
No, it's a process we do every month. Granted, this process would be a lot bigger because it'd be 100,000+ customers. And every month, when we run the DSS list, it's the 3,700 customers that we do the same process on. So it'd just take a little longer, not any different than what we're doing today.
Okay. And I think the last question or couple of questions I have is the same question I asked UI, which is whether you have a sense of the 2024 actual LiDAR costs yet.
Yeah, it's about 94 million. I believe that's prorating December. We don't have December's results yet. So
Okay.
around mid-90s.
Okay. So it's fair to, with the caveat that I understand these are all estimates, it sounds like it's a little lower than what's imputed in rates then?
Yeah, I think there's 100 or 101 million in the rates today, at least for LIDR. And then there was the LIDC. There was about 10 million in the rates, or maybe 8 million. But we started DSS data sharing in May. So that's when we saw the big jump in customers. So we're at that, call it 200,000 level now. So that's not going to go back down to where we were at the 90,000 level. Anytime. We'll be in 200,000 for quite some time.
Okay. And that was actually going to be my last question. And I accept that it's maybe not a fair question for this docket because it's literally a question in the RAM, but just roughly based on the presentation, it was my read of the tea leaves that it looked like the cost of the LiDAR is expected to maybe increase. Is that, or are we at a place where it's looking like it's steady?
We're not at a steady state yet on an annualized basis. And I don't see us being at a steady state until all these customers, whether we move them to 15% or 5%, are on their correct tier. So really a year out from DSS data sharing, 5-tier DSS data sharing is where we can see being like a steady state. As we progress towards that, it'll be more of a normal state, but not quite, when everybody's in their spot that they're supposed to be.
Okay.
And Mr. Wheel, Attorney Wheel, two things. We're not sure how the GET is included in that number compared to when we've done our little analysis. When we had modeled the with a 2% target, we were landing at around $107 million for the year to fund it. So, and then we know the authority's decision said hit 1.9% as a percentage of billed sales. So if we're at 94 million-ish now, like we don't know what December is, I think that's probably worth another evaluation. But again, no matter what we do, we haven't had a steady state year yet. So, but I think that the public benefits charge piece from July probably increased costs maybe abnormally at least in that component of the bill for the last 6 months of this year in a way that I wouldn't expect it would have in normal years. So maybe that, would contribute.
All right. Have any other questions? That was our last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deep doesn't have any questions? Okay,
Attorney Wheel asked all mine, so he has no questions.
thank you. does UI have any?
None from UI.
Okay. And does this Center for Children's
I
Advocacy?
promised.
Happy New Year.
I'd just like to re-ask the late file questions that I did for UI, unless you have that information. So if I can recall the numbers, the number of customers who are already on DSS sharing, who have been removed based on falling off. Okay.
I think we have that answer.
Well, yeah, so for that, we started DSS data sharing in May. So all the customers that received benefits from resulting of the DSS opt-out data sharing won't expire until May.
Okay.
We do have customers that were enrolled in, say, last December and part of the pre-enrollment that are enrolling now through DSS data sharing. But none of those original customers are expiring. So the number, it's 0. We don't have any yet.
So you don't have any of the newly enrolled who have then fallen off of DSS benefits?
If it helps, even if they've fallen off of that DSS benefits list for Avangrid as well, if I can speak for you guys, we're supposed to give them the 12 months on the discount rate, even if they fall off. So if they get enrolled May 1st and then they don't show up in the DSS file in April, we still keep them on the discount for 12 months from the time that DSS enrolled them. So nobody's expired.
So including the hardship status,
It is the financial hardship status. They're one and the same. That'll keep them on the discount rate.
IDR as well. Okay, great.
You got it.
So same question for customers so is the answer the same for customers who weren't enrolled based on data sharing? Who have now fallen off of LIDR because they didn't do their re-enrollment?
Yeah, so there's customers. So our initial enrollment was in December 2023. So there would be some customers that received expiration notices starting 2 months prior to that. And that has expired because they didn't renew and they weren't on the DSS list. I don't know how many offhand, but there would have been some that qualified through other means that have expired.
So can that be a late file question, please? Right.
Late file exhibit 49, number of customers who were not enrolled as a result of data sharing, but nevertheless fell off of LiDAR because they did not re-enroll and did not appear on DSS data sharing.
Right, thank you.
So that's late file exhibit 49.
And then my last question is around the customers who have exceeded the cap. So the numbers, for 2024 of customers who have exceeded the cap.
So we recently filed as part of the LIDR reporting on January 2nd, it's question 34 that has that information broken out by month, by space heating, non-space heating, has a number of customers and the kilowatt hours that exceeded the cap.
Is it broken up regionally by city or just by numbers?
Just in total.
Okay, all right, thank you. And my last sort of question or comment is, I'm concerned about that May date for DSS. And I mean, it's almost the inverse of it will cost. So my understanding is that if DSS isn't ready by May, and periodically over time DSS has not been timely in implementing programs, particularly with technology and cost. So at that point, the only customers, however, who will be eligible for those higher discounts will be the ones who will be manually doing it, correct?
If you're a DSS, if you enroll through if you're a tier 2 customer, say you're tier 2 today, 50%, and you expire in May and you're on the DSS list as a tier 2, we're going to continue you as a tier 2. We're not going to drop you back to a tier 1 since you've already provided that information.
I understand that, but no one would be that same person wouldn't be eligible for the 50% now because you don't have those tiers set up by DSS. In other words, if it takes DSS till December of 2025 to get this program, then that whole that grouping of customers, except for manually coming to you and applying, won't get that increased discount.
They would still have to go through the process they go through today, which is go to a community action agency or the utility to provide proof of household income.
Right, and there's
More than half.
communication with the customers around that, around how to do that.
Yep. We've filed all of that in the low income discount rate docket. It was reviewed and approved by stakeholders. That's the thing that both we and Avangrid are referring to about the 90-day advance notification to help make sure people get renewed. And then if noting on that, I think slide 3 might be 2 of the PDF, but Attorney Roswick, you can see in December there, so that, sorry, that one, yeah. From the beginning of December to the end of December, it went down about 1,000. So the net is still pretty high because it's only in December that we would have seen the first expirations, given that we just implemented the LIDR December of 2023.
Right, thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Attorney O'Hare, do you have any redirect? Thank you. Okay. So next steps, the late file exhibits are due on January 21st. And any additional scheduling updates will be posted to the external PURA webpage.
I have a question. Okay. Can I ask a question? So just, we are seeking guidance on whether we should continue to hold on sending the customer communication about the 5-tier LIDR. We're not allowed to implement the LIDR until we've started communication 30 days prior. So at this point, and we had been aiming for February 10th, Monday, February 10th. So at this point, if we are delaying the 5-tier LIDR to see what the decision is on this, whether the 5 tiers are going to stay the same, which doesn't seem to be the topic of today's questions. But I guess I don't know how to convey there's some time sensitivity, but we will be delaying then our 5-tier LIDR because we need the final guidance to make sure nothing's changed.
Can I ask that you file a motion? And then that will give
Thank you.
stakeholders an opportunity to comment, and we'll provide a ruling in writing. Thank you. Are there any other administrative matters before we adjourn for the day? Okay. Seeing none, I'd like to thank UI and Eversource for their presentations and the parties and interveners for their participation. And wish you all a very nice afternoon and thank you. We're adjourned.